The first thing they noticed was the silence. Not just quiet, but a vacuum that made every step, every breath echo in the narrow corridor. The girl, alone, towel wrapped around her shoulders, gym bag in hand, was unaware they were already watching. "Scream," one of them whispered, leaning against the door frame with that smug, predatory smile. "Where will you run?" Another unbuckled his belt casually, the kind of confidence that came from repeated success, from knowing the rules didn't apply to them. The third had his phone raised, the red recording light blinking, capturing her fear, or so he thought. The fourth, stationed behind the door, grinned as he clicked the lock into place. They didn't know her, they didn't care, and they had no idea what was coming. Her eyes flicked toward the door, registering positions, spacing, rhythm of movement. 1 step, 2 steps, 3. Each shadow, each echo in the linoleum hallway mapped in her mind in milliseconds. The first one lunged, a simple reach toward her shoulder, overconfident, predictable. And in that instant, she moved. Not wildly, not with panic, but with precision. Her left hand shot up, locking onto his wrist with surgical intent. His arm was trapped before he could react. Her right elbow came down in a brutal arc, striking just above the clavicle, nerves and sinew and pain transferring the instant truth. He was no longer in control. The others froze, confusion flashing across their faces, teeth gritted. They expected terror. They found calm. Cold, unblinking, deadly calm. The sound of flesh against bone was muffled by the hallway's emptiness. The first attacker stumbled, knees wobbling, chest colliding with the metal bench near the lockers. The second took a step forward, cocky, trying to assert dominance, but she was already there, sidestepping, shoulder grazing his chest, knee rising sharply into his lower abdomen. It was controlled, calculated, and in those 3 heartbeats, the illusion of power evaporated. The third's phone wobbled, still recording, still oblivious. He thought he had captured the trophy of fear. He had captured their own destruction. The fourth, frozen at the door, realized too late that the trap wasn't set for the girl. They had walked straight into the lion's den, and the lion was already awake. "Turn it off," her voice cut through the corridor. Quiet, final, like steel snapping. Not loud, but it carried weight that made the air itself shiver. The first man coughed, the second staggered, and the third froze mid-record, thumb hovering uselessly over the stop button. Every one of them realized at the same time they had underestimated the woman in front of her. Confidence cracked, arrogance shattered, and the thrill of the hunt inverted into terror. She stepped closer to the door-guarding fourth man, and he instinctively raised his hands, half backpedaling. "Step away," she said. The words were simple, commanding, absolute. He complied, every instinct screaming he should fight, run, or shout. None of it mattered anymore. Footsteps echoed somewhere down the hall, distant but growing, but she didn't flinch. Her eyes never left the trio in front of her. The hallway's fluorescent lights flickered, shadows stretching across cracked beige walls. Each man tried to reclaim composure, tried to strategize. Bray, the tall, clean-cut one, flexed his fingers around his phone as if it could save him. Ruiz, the thick-set boxer shadow, twitched nervously, his bravado crumbling in real time. The last, smaller one, leaned against the wall, eyes darting, trying to calculate escape. They thought the night was theirs. They were wrong. Dead wrong. Every second ticking closer to their irreversible mistake. A low laugh escaped her lips, slow, deliberate, almost playful. Not mockery, not cruelty, but a quiet affirmation of control. She stepped toward Ruiz, trapping his wrist against the wall with a subtle twist. He gasped, staggering as the realization hit. It wasn't fear, it was certainty. And in the mirror behind them, the phone's reflection captured her calm, her dominance, her unshakable focus. Every angle, every shadow, every move had been noted. The men were already part of her map. One misstep, one moment of hesitation, and it was over. And it was almost over. Then, as the silence stretched, she spoke again, softer this time, almost conversational. "You think you're in charge," she said, pacing slowly, deliberately, letting each word sink. "You think this is your night, but it's not. Not tonight, not ever." The words hit, not like a slap, not like a shout, but like a verdict. Ruiz's knees buckled slightly. Bray's jaw clenched. The door guard shivered, realizing fully that he was witnessing something beyond his comprehension. She was calm, she was prepared, and she was just getting started. Every breath they drew now carried the weight of impending reckoning. Her hand moved with the ease of a seasoned operator, snapping up to block the next approach before it even began. Their strategy, rehearsed and arrogant, dissolved before her precision. She didn't shout, she didn't panic, she assessed, she acted, and she controlled. The camera still recording, capturing the unfolding scene in cold, unflinching clarity. And in that corridor, in those first 30 seconds of perceived vulnerability, the narrative flipped entirely. The predators were now the prey, and the girl, the helpless girl, was something they had never, ever been prepared to face.
Bray swallowed hard, his phone still blinking. The smug grin that had carried him through countless victories was gone, replaced by disbelief and panic. Ruiz tried to rise, but her elbow dug subtly into his ribs, reminding him that movement was a privilege he no longer had. The door guard, younger and smaller, shook visibly, caught between instincts of flight and the unspoken command that radiated from her every motion. And still, she didn't raise her voice. Calm, deliberate, lethal calm. That was enough to make them hesitate, enough to make them second-guess every decision they had made in their arrogant little world. Each second stretched like hours. Each breath she allowed them to take was a measured gift, a psychological chokehold. The first man gasped, staggering backward into the lockers, hands pressed to his chest, trying to reclaim air and composure simultaneously. But the hallway's acoustics betrayed him. Every wheeze, every hiss of breath bounced back like an echo of failure. The second, Ruiz, felt his heart hammering in a rhythm that wasn't his own. She was dictating it. Every glance, every step she took, every minor adjustment of her posture was a reminder. She saw everything, and they were exposed, stripped bare not physically, but psychologically. She didn't even touch the phone at first. Let it record. Let it capture their complete unraveling. This wasn't about pain. This was about control, the pure, unassailable domination of someone they had assumed was powerless. Then she stepped closer to Bray, slow, deliberate, letting the light catch the edge of her eyes and the flickering fluorescence. "You thought you were smart," she said, almost conversationally, letting the words sink like ice. "You thought this was routine. You thought there were no consequences." He blinked. He didn't move. He couldn't. Ruiz tried again, a lunge toward the door, hoping to escape, but she was already there, intercepting, twisting him just enough to stop him mid-motion without leaving a mark. Her hands were precise instruments of authority. They realized simultaneously that she was not a civilian, not a trainee, not even a regular officer. She was something far worse for them, the reckoning they had never imagined. The door guard, Mitchell, finally managed a whispered, Who are you?" His voice trembled so badly it was almost comedic, except the situation wasn't funny. She didn't answer immediately. She allowed him a heartbeat, 2, 3, to truly grasp that his fate, his entire perception of dominance, had been turned upside down. Then she tilted her head ever so slightly and said, "I'm the last person you want to underestimate, and you already did." The room went still. The phone's red light blinked silently, documenting the horror that had unfolded in less than a minute. They were trapped in a cage of realization, and the predator was calm, collected, unflinching. Bray's hands twitched, still clutching the phone. "You can't," he started, his voice cracking in disbelief. She didn't respond. She didn't need to. One subtle shift in her weight, one measured step toward him, and the panic was all-consuming. Ruiz's knees buckled again. The door guard's fingers were white-knuckled against the frame. Every instinct screaming fight or flight was overridden by one simple truth. She controlled the corridor, the air, the narrative, and every single one of them. Their confidence, arrogance, and prior victories evaporated like smoke. And in that moment, every viewer, every person reading this should be gasping too, because this is no ordinary confrontation. Then she allowed herself a slow exhale, letting the tension stretch another heartbeat, another second. The predators had believed in the invincibility of the system, in their immunity, in the unspoken rules that protected them, but she had dismantled that illusion in 30 seconds. She didn't shout. She didn't panic. She just existed, and that existence was enough to rewrite the hierarchy in that corridor. The floor seemed smaller under their feet, the walls closer, the air heavier. Even the light flickered as if acknowledging the shift in power. Their plans, rehearsed and arrogant, meant nothing. She was the apex predator, and they had walked willingly into her trap. A faint sound reached them then, boots against tile, distant but deliberate, signaling movement from outside. But she didn't flinch, not a twitch, not a glance. The distant echo wasn't a warning for her, it was simply a part of the environment she had already accounted for. She crouched just enough to adjust her center of gravity and swept her eyes across each man's posture, timing, breathing, and micro-expressions. In her mind, the sequence of events was already mapped out. Who would fall? Who would break? Who would beg? And in the reflection of the phone's screen, the third man, the one who had thought himself smart enough to record, saw clearly for the first time what he had underestimated. Not a victim, but an operator, calm, precise, and unstoppable. Riley's eyes narrowed, scanning the corridor one last time. Bray's chest heaved as he bent over the fallen bench, sweat dripping from his brow, lips parted in disbelief. Ruiz's fingers shook uncontrollably, pressed to his ribs where her precise strike had left a subtle, unforgettable warning. The door guard, Mitchell, still frozen near the exit, realized fully that survival now depended entirely on obedience. One wrong move, one twitch, one breath out of place, and it would all collapse in an instant. And she didn't need to raise her voice. The room already trembled with the weight of her presence. A slow, deliberate step forward, and she grabbed Bray's phone from the floor with one hand. Red dots still blinking, recording every mistake, every panic-filled expression, every failed attempt at dominance. "Perfect," she said, soft but clear. Not mockery, not threat, just observation. The irony was cruel. They had come to film a victim, to assert control, to make their twisted version of fun. And instead, they had filmed themselves, entirely, unfiltered, undeniable. She tapped the screen once. Saved. Evidence. Documentation. Immutable. She didn't need words. The images, the video, the reality of what had happened spoke louder than any scream, any threat, any bluster could ever achieve. Bray straightened slightly, a flicker of defiance in his eyes. What are you?" His voice cracked mid-sentence. Riley tilted her head, calm, cold, unshakable. "I'm the one who audits monsters like you, and today you failed." Each word landed like a hammer. Ruiz swayed, knees weak, mouth opening for a retort that never came. Mitchell's eyes were wide, trembling, the weight of his error settling into his stomach like lead. The predators, in 30 seconds, had become the hunted. And Riley? She was neither angry nor vengeful. Not yet. She was methodical, surgical, unyielding. A sudden creak echoed down the hall. Someone was coming, but Riley didn't flinch. Not a twitch, not a glance. The distant sound of boots on tile, slow and measured, wasn't a threat. It was part of the plan she had already envisioned, accounted for, prepared. She crouched slightly, recalibrating. One step, one breath, one decision at a time. And then, with the calm of a storm ready to break, she raised her voice, low and final. "You three are going to stay exactly where you are, and when the others arrive, you're going to answer for everything, every single thing, starting with this." She gestured to the phone in her hand, still blinking, still recording. The corridor seemed to shrink around them. Bray's jaw clenched, Ruiz's chest heaved, Mitchell's hands trembled. And Riley? She simply stood, calm, almost serene, letting the weight of her presence, the reality of their failure, and the undeniable evidence settle over them like an iron curtain. Their arrogance, their history of thinking they were untouchable, evaporated in the span of 1 minute, 30 seconds, and a single operator's precision. She wasn't loud, she wasn't dramatic, she simply existed, and that existence obliterated the illusion of safety they had built around themselves. Then, as the echo of distant footsteps drew nearer, she crouched, fast, and locked eyes with the nearest man, whispering so only he could hear. "This is just the beginning. The first domino has fallen, and the rest you'll see soon enough." And with that, she stepped back slowly, deliberately, letting the camera capture her calm, her control, her silent dominance. The men, still reeling, realized too late that the victim they had thought helpless was far more than anyone could have imagined. They were trapped in their own hubris. The final seconds of point one stretched, charged, electric. Her eyes scanned, noting every potential hazard, every possible witness, every exit. And as the distant footsteps grew nearer, she gave a final, almost imperceptible nod, both a warning and a signal. The predators who had come for power, control, and humiliation were now frozen in fear, completely at her mercy. And the audience? They would be hooked, hearts racing, eyes wide, because in 30 seconds, everything they thought they knew about the scenario had been shredded. Riley's lips curved to the smallest, most controlled smile, not for them, not for the camera, but for the satisfaction of knowing the world underestimated her, and they would never do it again. "Hey guys, welcome back to my channel, Silent Heroes," she said, voice calm but confident, as if narrating to a world that needed to know the truth. The story was far from over, and the audience, European, American, Canadian, Australian, wouldn't forget this. Not ever. Not after the first 30 seconds of shock, domination, and revelation. The van rattled along the cracked asphalt, dust kicking up in lazy swirls around the tires. Riley Hart sat in the back, hands folded over her duffel, eyes scanning every shadow beyond the reinforced glass. To anyone watching, she looked ordinary, another officer reporting for temporary duty, blending seamlessly into the rhythm of base arrivals. No entourage, no flashing insignia, no one to draw attention. But the calm in her expression hid the storm beneath. Every exit, every gate, every blind corner was cataloged in her mind. She wasn't here to socialize. She wasn't here to observe innocently. She was here to audit predators. The gates of the base loomed ahead, tall and imposing, manned by bored sentries who believed that uniforms were enough to enforce order. Riley's ID, official but unremarkable, was presented without flourish. She gave a small nod and stepped through, her boots clicking in a cadence that spoke of control. Every step she took was deliberate, precise, measured to the millisecond. She noticed the angle of the cameras, the gaps in coverage, the shadows that stretched long in the fading afternoon light. She cataloged the patrol rotations and the patterns of those who thought they could exploit the system. Everything she saw was a piece of a puzzle that no one here had any idea she was assembling. Inside the administrative wing, she greeted the duty officer with polite words and a neutral smile. "Commander Hart, welcome. Your quarters are ready. Colonel Anders expects you at 0700 for a briefing." Her nod was small, professional, unreadable. The officer glanced at her rank, eyes flicking with a mix of curiosity and caution. Riley didn't notice. Her attention was elsewhere. Every gesture, every word, every movement she made was a calculated distraction. They saw her as a newcomer, a visitor. They saw nothing of the operative who had dismantled insurgent cells in foreign war zones, who had infiltrated hostile compounds, who had neutralized threats no one else even recognized. Her temporary office was sterile. Standard issue desk, laptop, key card with access above most junior officers, a welcome coffee pod box left as if to humanize her presence. Riley dropped her duffel, unzipped the top, and retrieved a sealed folder. Thick stock paper, marked eyes only, directives from the highest authority, orders that didn't speak of training oversight, orders that spoke of patterns, climate assessments, unreported incidents. She read once, then again, absorbing each word with a quiet intensity that no one else could perceive. She wasn't here to monitor PT or track schedules. She was here to observe predators in their natural habitat. The first whispers of her shadow game began even before the sun fully set. From her window, she watched trainees move across the yard, laughing, carrying equipment, oblivious to the predator in plain sight. She noted the subtle cues, a scuff mark along a locker corridor, a paper sign freshly printed over a worn doorway, the faint echo of footsteps slightly off timing. Every detail mattered. The anomalies were patterns, and the patterns led to the predators she already knew were here. These were men who had exploited the shadows, who had thrived because systems looked away, and she had come to remind them that oversight existed even in places they believed were safe. Riley's mind flashed briefly to previous operations, northern deserts, shadowed alleys, compounds where a single misstep meant death. She didn't dwell, not now, but her movements, subtle, precise, calm, bore the weight of experience. Each step was calculated, each glance was tactical reconnaissance. She didn't make a sound, yet the environment itself seemed to react to her presence, as if it understood the predator she had become. And in the corners of her mind, she cataloged the names, habits, and likely locations of the men she had been sent to observe. They didn't know she was here. They didn't even suspect, and that was perfect. The predators, Corporal Mason Reed, Specialist Leo Turner, Private First Class Blake Hudson, and Staff Sergeant Victor Gaines, operated in predictable arrogance. They were known for their covert intimidation, their exploitation of after-hours shadows, their protected violations that never reached official records. Bray, Ruiz, Dorr, they were the ghosts of previous bases, the recurring nightmare in her operational memory. Each man had left a trail, informal complaints buried, transfers manipulated, whispers ignored. Riley knew every angle, every weakness, every inflated ego, and as she walked the corridors, she imagined the disbelief that would cross their faces when they realized she had been 3 steps ahead since day one. Evenings were her playground. The recovery wing, dimly lit, half-renovated, almost abandoned, became a theater for observation. The faint hum of air vents, the flicker of broken fluorescents, the distant echoes of late-shift personnel, all components in the mental map she was creating. Broken locks, subtle tool marks, scuff patterns, every anomaly whispered secrets about behavior, about boundaries crossed. She noted them quietly, cataloging the data for later action. She didn't need to interact. The predator's own overconfidence did that for her. Each movement, each attempt at dominance, each little act of control became evidence in their eventual unraveling. Riley's routine was simple, but deceptive. She would appear ordinary, moving like a visitor, a low-profile officer checking in. Yet every shadow, every hallway, every camera blind spot was memorized. She'd position herself, allow the men to believe the night was theirs, to believe they were untouchable. She dropped hints, a subtle tightening of a fist, a glance down a corridor, a shift in weight reminiscent of previous operations long past. None would recognize the warning, but the audience would sense it. She wasn't just a survivor, she was a strategist, a shadow operative, and the one thing they could not predict. And then the tension built. Reed leaned against the locker, smirking, unaware that his movements had been tracked, cataloged, and mentally mapped. Turner joked under his breath about the quiet corridors. Hudson adjusted a locker, completely oblivious that every action was being recorded in Riley's mind. Gaines, the so-called cleanup man, lingered with the air of authority he had abused before. But Riley's presence in the wing had rewritten the rules. The predators thought themselves untouchable. They had no idea she had anticipated this exact scenario, had planned for it, and was already 3 steps ahead. Hints of past operations surfaced in subtle, almost offhand remarks. Riley muttered to herself, brushing her fingers over a locker edge. Check corners, eyes everywhere. Never let them control the rhythm. A seasoned observer would understand. The rest would underestimate her. And that underestimation was the point. The predators, watching shadows dance across the walls, sensed nothing. They believed the night was theirs. They believed the system protected them. They were wrong. And Riley's mind raced ahead, calculating sequences, predicting their moves, and preparing contingencies. By the time darkness fully fell, the predators were active, confident in their after-hours liberty. Reed whispered suggestions for minor harassment. Turner chuckled at a subtle intimidation tactic. Hudson lingered near the broken locker, pretending to be casual. Gaines oversaw, controlling, protecting, thinking the hierarchy shielded them. But Riley was ready. Every nuance, every flicker of arrogance, every small act of predatory behavior was noted, and when the time came, she would exploit it, using her full arsenal of skill, experience, and authority. Then, a faint, almost imperceptible shift. The predators began planning something more ambitious, something malicious. Reed glanced at Turner, whispered instructions that assumed no witness. Hudson adjusted his stance to block an exit subtly. Gaines surveyed, ensuring that if anything went wrong, blame would be deflected. But Riley anticipated it all. She was never surprised. She was never caught off guard. Every potential threat had been rehearsed in her mind, and the audience, hanging on every word, every detail, every hint of tension, could feel the adrenaline spike, the calm before the storm. Riley stepped back into the shadows, letting the predators believe the night was still theirs. She didn't move yet. She didn't need to. The trap was set. Every subtle shift in posture, every glimmer of confidence from the men, every casual laugh they let slip, it all fed into the crescendo that would come. And she allowed a small, knowing smile to cross her lips. They had no idea who she really was. They had no idea that their every action, every plan, every attempt to assert power was already documented, predicted, and ready to be undone. The final moments of the night before the confrontation stretched like eternity. Riley observed, cataloged, calculated. The predators were on the cusp of making a critical mistake, one that would ensure their unraveling. And as the distant lights flickered across the empty corridors, her mind prepared the final moves. The audience would feel the tension, the anticipation, the thrill. They would know, in their hearts, that she was ready. The predators were confident, reckless, untouchable, and Riley Hart, she was the storm they had failed to see coming. The night hung heavy over the recovery wing, silence stretching long and unbroken, except for the faint hum of air vents and the distant metallic echo of machinery. Riley Hart moved like a shadow, her towel draped over one arm, duffel bag slung across her shoulder. She didn't hurry. She didn't panic. Every step was a calculation, every glance cataloged, every potential line of attack accounted for. She wasn't here to bluff. She wasn't here to survive. She was here to neutralize. And tonight, the predators would learn exactly what happens when confidence meets authority they can neither fight nor escape. Corporal Mason Reed leaned against the wall, smirking, already believing he had the upper hand. Specialist Leo Turner lurked nearby, whispering crude suggestions to Hudson, while Staff Sergeant Gaines surveyed the corridor like a king in his castle. Their arrogance was palpable, their confidence intoxicating. They thought the after-hours recovery wing belonged to them. They believed their shadows gave them power. And for a moment, Riley let them savor that illusion. Let them think they were in control. It would make their unraveling all the more spectacular. She placed her duffel down, slid out her ID wallet, and let her eyes flick across the corridor with lethal calm. Every movement of theirs had already been anticipated, every footstep cataloged, every intent read. And then she spoke, soft, controlled, impossibly calm. Step aside, hands visible, now. Reed's smirk faltered. Turner froze mid-laugh. Hudson straightened, unsure whether he had heard correctly. Gaines's eyes narrowed, calculating risk, but for the first time, he didn't call the shots. Riley's presence alone warped the dynamic, her authority palpable in the stale night air. They realized, too late, that they were being measured and found lacking. Turner, bold and reckless, lunged first. A miscalculation. Riley didn't react emotionally. She reacted procedurally, mechanically, surgically, the way she had neutralized threats in foreign compounds, under fire, with no backup. Her left hand locked his wrists before his momentum could carry him further. Her right elbow slammed into the side of his neck, targeting the precise nerve cluster to incapacitate without permanent harm. Turner collapsed against the lockers, groaning, winded, stunned by the efficiency of her strike. Reed's phone clattered to the floor mid-recording, capturing the chaos he had intended to orchestrate. Hudson moved next, panic flashing in his eyes, a predator caught in the sudden uncertainty of a calculated opponent. Riley pivoted, sweeping his balance with a controlled leg strike, forcing him into a stumble that sent him crashing into a bench. His scream echoed, half shock, half pain, but Riley didn't pause. She stepped around him, watching him writhe and flail, noting every angle, every reaction. The psychological domination was as deliberate as the physical. By the time he regained footing, Riley was already 3 steps ahead, her calm unnerving, her presence dictating the terms of engagement. Reed, recovering faster than expected, charged with raw ego and misjudged strength. Riley sidestepped with surgical precision, using his own momentum to redirect him into the wall. Every move was controlled, every force applied exact. The corridor became a trap, an arena, a showcase of unchallenged skill. Gaines shouted, finally breaking his silence, "Stop her! She's not supposed to—" But his voice faltered mid-command. Riley's gaze locked on him, calm, precise, unstoppable. "You have no authority here," she said, almost conversational, almost polite, yet every word carried the weight of sealed orders, the authority to act, to command, to enforce. And that was the moment the predators realized the true scope of her identity. Riley Hart was not merely a temporary officer. She was the operative sent directly from command, authorized to act beyond the usual chain, armed with full operational clearance. She wasn't improvising, she wasn't bluffing, she was executing a plan that had been drafted weeks, months, even years prior. Every violation, every informal complaint, every pattern of abuse had been documented, cross-referenced, sealed, and authorized to action. Their arrogance met its match, and it was absolute.
The 4th man, young Mitchell, frozen near the exit, had been ordered previously to call for backup, but his hands shook, the phone slipping from his grip as realization sank in. Riley didn't chase. She didn't yell. She simply moved, slow, deliberate, authoritative. She approached him, controlled, exuding the calm that only comes from experience and operational knowledge. "Step aside, now," she commanded. He obeyed instinctively, eyes wide, body trembling, understanding that his failure to act in anticipation had already placed him outside the safety of hierarchy. Reed attempted a last-ditch flurry, but Riley's counter was instantaneous. A lock, a twist, a strike. He crumpled, face pale, ego shattered, body immobilized. Turner remained slumped on the bench, the adrenaline fading, panic settling in. Hudson tried to retreat, only to have Riley intercept with a seamless pivot, guiding his momentum against the wall. Each predator reacted differently, one physically defeated, one mentally panicked, one caught mid-escape. The psychological pressure was absolute, and all the while her calm authority radiated, suffocating any remaining confidence they had left. By the time the duty officer arrived, followed by base security, the room had transformed. What should have been a chaotic assault scene was now a tableau of total control. The 3 main predators, Reed, Turner, Hudson, were either collapsed, disoriented, or immobilized. Mitchell remained at the periphery, compliant, awestruck. Riley stood at the center, composed, documenting the scene, collecting the evidence herself. The atmosphere shifted instantly. Authority had changed sides. The predator's own system, once their shield, now validated Riley's power. Every viewer, every audience member would gasp at the precision, the authority, the absolute domination she commanded. She handed over her ID, showing sealed operational orders, clearance beyond local command, authority to act immediately in response to climate violations. The NCOs and security personnel stepped back, processing the tableau. Riley didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. Her presence, her actions, her mastery of procedure and combat had already spoken louder than any declaration could. The predators, once confident in the shadows, now lay exposed, legally, physically, psychologically. They had no recourse, no escape, no defense. The recording from Reed's phone, still blinking red, documented every second of their downfall. The air vibrated with tension as Riley collected it, preserving unassailable evidence. She didn't gloat. She didn't celebrate. Her calm, deliberate movements emphasized her dual identity,
operator, and authorized oversight authority. The Predator's failure wasn't just physical, it was systemic. They had thought themselves untouchable. They were wrong, and the system itself, finally aligned with her, ensured that their reckoning would be both immediate and thorough. And then, as the sound of boots echoed in the hallway, Riley turned, handing the evidence and her ID to the first arriving officers. Every motion measured, every word precise. She didn't shout, but when she spoke, it carried the weight of authority that could not be denied. The Predator's realization hit in waves. Total domination, legal and tactical, combined into a single orchestrated event. For the audience, the adrenaline surged. What began as an ordinary after-hours harassment scenario had transformed into a full-scale audit executed with flawless precision. The Predators had thought victory was theirs. They had thought shadows were their allies. They had thought the system would protect them. But Riley Hart's presence proved the opposite. Authority, precision, tactical skill, and psychological domination had converged. They were powerless, utterly, completely, and as the camera blinked on, recording the aftermath of their hubris, the audience could feel the shock, the awe, the revelation. This was never random. This was meticulously designed, flawlessly executed, and irreversible. The morning sun broke over the base perimeter, sharp light spilling across the training yards, yet the mood inside the administration building was darker than night. Riley Hart walked with deliberate calm, file in hand, her boots echoing on the polished floors like measured warning shots. This was not about adrenaline. This was about systems, about patterns, about exposing a rot that had festered long before anyone noticed. Every step, every breath, every hand she extended to pass over evidence carried authority beyond personal revenge. This was about procedural justice, about exposing the skeletons hidden behind rank, privilege, and silence. Inside the commander's office, Colonel Laundrie Keaton looked up startled, his eyes wide as Riley placed a thick folder on the desk. She didn't wait for permission. She didn't announce herself dramatically. She simply spoke, calm, clipped. This is not a single incident. This is a culture. Every file, every report, every informal complaint has been collated. These are the names, the dates, the patterns, and it all points to the same conclusion. The Predators were protected by a system, not just by arrogance. His jaw tightened. Sweat glistened on his temple. He hadn't seen the scale yet. Not really. Riley's fingers flicked through the folders, pulling out time-stamped phone recordings, official reports, sealed complaint letters, and confidential memos. Each piece was meticulously cross-referenced, color-coded, and documented. She dropped one photo after another onto his desk, letting the visual gravity hit him. Faces, names, timestamps, evidence of abuse, cover-ups, and silent transfers. One after another, the Predator's misconduct lay bare, systematically erased in bureaucratic shadows. "These aren't mistakes," Riley said, her voice low but icy. "These are deliberate, and this ends today." Colonel Laundrie's hand shook slightly as he reached for the first file. I didn't know," he started, voice barely audible. Riley cut him off with a sharp, controlled tone that brooked no interruption. "You didn't ask, that's the problem." Her eyes burned with the weight of professional disappointment, not emotional vengeance, yet it hit harder than any shout could. She had come to audit, to reveal, to enforce. The Predators had fallen. Now the system would follow. The real enemy had always been bigger than the hallway, bigger than the individual men, bigger than assumptions of safety. It was a network of complicity, inertia, and silence. She activated the chain of command remotely, sending copies of evidence directly to senior oversight, bypassing anyone who might have attempted to delay action. Within minutes, security, legal, and human resources were mobilized. The Predators, previously untouchable, were now frozen in the teeth of procedural law. Every rank that had allowed them to continue without accountability was exposed. Transfers previously recorded as voluntary were now flagged as coerced. Whistleblowers, previously silent, were given formal protection under new directives. The base's own internal systems had become instruments of justice. Meanwhile, Riley's phone buzzed lightly, a reminder of the live evidence she had collected in the recovery wing. She played clips back for the senior officers, not to gloat, but to ensure that the documentation was undeniable. Every detail mattered: the precise takedown techniques, the order of events, the reactions of each predator. The officers in the room flinched at the clarity. The predators had thought themselves untouchable. Now every movement was recorded, cataloged, and unassailable. Her calm, surgical control had turned the tables, not only physically, but bureaucratically. As the morning wore on, disciplinary actions were initiated. The predators were placed under immediate detainment. Legal reviews were opened, and their personal records flagged for forensics. No longer would their misconduct be quietly erased. The culture of protection that had allowed them to thrive in the shadows was collapsing under the weight of one woman's meticulous observation, procedural authority, and unyielding discipline. Riley watched, not with triumph, but with professional satisfaction. The system was responding as it should have. By mid-morning, the ripple effects extended beyond the initial perpetrators. Commanders who had failed to act, supervisors who had ignored warnings, and officers complicit through silence were all now under review. Riley coordinated with external auditors, ensuring that protected interviews were conducted without influence from the base command. Every prior informal report, every anonymous complaint was reopened, reevaluated, and incorporated into the systemic audit. Predators were no longer the only target. The system itself, once invisible and protected, was being held accountable. The atmosphere inside the command building was tense, electric, a combination of fear, awe, and respect. The predators themselves sat quietly in isolation, powerless, unable to deny the scope of their exposure. Each one of them had believed that secrecy, hierarchy, and intimidation were shields, but Riley's work demonstrated that neither physical strength nor rank could withstand meticulous planning, operational authority, and the cold weight of evidence. She had dismantled their illusion of invincibility without a single shout, without a single threat beyond procedural truth. In the training yards outside, junior enlisted members observed the subtle shifts in culture. Whispers of the audit spread quietly, almost reverently. Those who had endured harassment now walked straighter, their voices more confident, their demeanor more assured. The predators' previous influence evaporated like smoke, and a new standard of accountability began to take root. Riley did not need recognition. The cultural shift itself was the reward. Her mission had always been systemic, not personal. Her authority, previously hidden, had reshaped an environment long taken for granted. Hours later, Riley returned to her office, a quiet command center for what had already become a historic procedural intervention. She reviewed each file, ensuring documentation was complete, records uploaded to secure servers, and copies sent to oversight. The predators, the system, the culture, they were all accounted for. There would be no cover-ups, no silence, no gaps. Every action, every document, every timestamp reinforced the conclusion. Justice had been delivered, not through anger, not through vengeance, but through precision, authority, and unyielding procedural enforcement. Then, with a soft exhale, Riley looked into the camera mounted in her office. Not a weapon, not a surveillance tool, but a medium for connection. "Hey guys," she began, voice calm but carrying weight. "Welcome back to my channel, Silent Heroes. If my work here shows you anything, it's that standing up to predators isn't just about strength, it's about patience, preparation, and the courage to enforce the system when no one else will." She leaned forward slightly, eyes locked on the lens, letting every word sink in. This channel exists to highlight those who fight silently, those whose work might never make headlines but reshape lives forever. If this story resonated with you, if it reminded you that one person can catalyze change in even the most corrupt system, please subscribe. Hit like and leave a comment telling me where in the world you're watching from, because your voice matters. Your attention fuels the work, spreads the message, and ensures that accountability doesn't stay silent. She paused, letting the weight of the day settle. Outside, the base continued its routines, unaware of the cultural earthquake that had been set in motion within its walls. Yet, the predators learned a lesson they would never forget. The system learned a lesson it could not ignore. And the audience, anyone watching, anywhere in the world, had witnessed the unfolding of justice that was intelligent, cold, complete, and permanent. The calm, procedural dismantling of power structures left no room for doubt, no space for question. Systemic reform had begun. Riley's final act that day was quiet, but deliberate. She placed the last folder into a secure drop, activated digital audits, and exhaled. Her mission was not finished. Systemic vigilance is endless, but the predators were neutralized, the system exposed, and the culture corrected. As she turned from the office, there was no fanfare, no dramatic gesture, yet the silence itself was deafening. It screamed of accountability, of empowerment, and of the long-lasting impact of one operator armed with the truth, authority, and unrelenting precision. And then, addressing the viewers once more, her tone softened slightly, more personal. If my channel and this story can make even the smallest difference in your life, in your perspective, or in someone you know, I'd be grateful if you hit subscribe, give this video a like, and leave a comment telling me where in the world you're watching from. Because your voice matters. Your attention fuels the work, spreads the message, and ensures that accountability doesn't stay silent. She paused, calm, steady, authoritative. Justice had been served. Procedure had prevailed, and for those watching, the lesson was clear. The system can be dismantled, corrected, and reformed if the right person chooses to act.